We talked about in our lab time on Tuesday how the focus of our lab work was going to be on working towards this idea of incorporating business intelligence into ERP SIM. And so the point of this discussion was to set the stage on, what is it we're talking about when we say business intelligence? Why is this important? Why is this an area that companies right now are really focused on so significantly? And we started off with this, and this is a bit of a review for us, but we started off with a definition of what is it when we're talking about intelligence. And in particular, we focused on these two definitions from the dictionary: the ability to learn or understand or deal with new and trying situations, and the ability to apply knowledge to manipulate one's environment. And I really think that there are some key words and phrases here. This idea of learning, this idea of understanding, and this idea of applying knowledge. And we talked briefly about, in our time on Tuesday, how the goal is to try and understand what's going on in our organization beyond just on a surface level, beyond just the raw facts of I sold 50 units of this product today at this price, and I think that's a good thing. Well, is it a good thing or is it not a good thing? How do we answer that question? And so the idea is that companies have the ability to learn and understand what's going on in their organization and to apply that knowledge. Let me give you a great example of this from a company that probably a lot of you are familiar with, Amazon.com. Can anybody think of an example of how Amazon.com employs business intelligence in a way that is useful and profitable for them as an organization?
Product recommendations?
Product recommendations. And that's a good example because, at least in theory, that's good for Amazon, and it's also good for customers. I don't know what your experience has been, but there have been times when I learned about a product I did not otherwise know about by looking at something Amazon recommended. Well, how did Amazon formulate that recommendation? There's actually lots of different kinds of recommendation systems. There have been some companies that have literally experimented with randomized recommendation systems. They just pick products at random and say, hey, this is something you might like. And the problem with that is, of course, people might not have any interest in that at all. But what Amazon does is they build profiles of customers, and they look at, here's Bob, and over the last few years, Bob has bought these 157 products, and here's Sue, and Sue has bought a very similar set of products to Bob. So let's look at the things that Bob has bought that Sue has not, and vice versa, under the theory that what Bob likes, apparently Sue likes too, so there's going to be some overlap there. There are other ways we can make recommendations. When you go to a grocery store, and I don't know how much grocery shopping you folks do, but when you go to a grocery store and you're walking down the aisle where there are spaghetti noodles, a lot of times sitting next to that on the display is jars of spaghetti sauce, because they figure if you're going to buy spaghetti noodles, you probably need sauce, and vice versa. So sometimes we can make recommendations based on, hey, you just bought a hammer, how would you like to buy some nails to go with that? So there's lots of different ways that we could formulate recommendations. But what Amazon specifically does is they try and learn about their customers. And what Amazon will tell you is they really try and go beyond just a surface level. They really want to try and truly understand what motivates their customers so that they can make better recommendations. And making those better recommendations would be an example of applying knowledge. Now, I would suggest to you that what we are talking about here gives Amazon a competitive advantage. So my question to you is, why does this give Amazon an advantage over its competitors?
I think first it helps out Amazon to be able to get the right product to the right customers?
Okay, that's an excellent answer. And there's a lot of things in that. First of all, it helps Amazon get the right products to sell, but then to get those products in front of the right customers so that they can select that. That absolutely is true. What else plays into this? Yes, sir.
The user experience for me of a customer at Amazon would be different because I see it's as if they read my mind. They know I want this and I get it, and I'm able to.
So the user experience is very different. So let me ask you this. Let's assume you decided, foolishly, but you decided nonetheless, to try and compete with Amazon. What challenge would you face?
Including brick and mortars as well? Or?
No, let's just say you wanted to compete with Amazon. You wanted to create an online store to compete with Amazon. What challenge do you face?
Winning over the customers.
Winning over the customers, okay. What else?
Collecting data.
What's that?
Is it collecting data?
Okay, what does Amazon have that you don't have? A whole lot of data about a whole lot of customers, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you start your business next week, you're starting with basically an empty database of customer information. Do you realize all of the customers that shop at Amazon all over the world, do you realize how much they know about customers? You know, they can look back at, in my case, I did this recently out of curiosity. Amazon started, and I've forgotten, I want to say it was 1995. And I bought a product from them like in the first 2 months that they were in operation. I can go back and look at my order history, and I can go all the way back to 1995 and look at the first 2 books that I bought from Amazon. And they have all of the history of everything that I have bought. But you know what else Amazon has? I can go and I can look at all of the products that I have bought. Do you realize that at least hypothetically, because a lot of this we don't know for sure because Amazon doesn't tell us, Amazon could probably also tell me all the things that I put in my shopping cart and decided not to buy. And they probably could also, if they really wanted to, they might even be able to tell me all the products I looked at and decided not to buy. So there's all this information they have about people really all over the world. Could you imagine if you had access to that data set, all of the very insightful things you could learn from that? Well, that gives them a tremendous advantage in operating their business. Somebody might come to them, hypothetically, and say, I'm thinking about writing a book, and the book's going to be about, you know, dragons and vampires that ride on the dragons, and you know, they could describe all of these themes, and Amazon might be able to say, you know, based on our experience, that book has a certain percentage of being successful because we know how many people like dragons and we know all this other stuff. Whereas if you said, I'm going to write a book about, you know, 10-headed fairies that like to eat toothpaste, you know, they might say, that doesn't sound like it's going to be a bestseller. But if you think about all the different questions you could ask, you know, you could ask, okay, when guys buy sneakers, what's the most popular color sneaker do they buy? When ladies buy stuff for their hair, what kind of stuff do they tend to buy more often than other products? You have this very, very rich data set that you can use as a company to understand your customers better, but understand that just because you have that data doesn't do you any good. You have to take the time to look at that data, and you have to be able to figure out how to extract information from it that will actually help you. So we talked about this idea that in business, there are a lot of questions that we ask on an ongoing basis. What's going well? Amazon, for example, could ask what products are selling well, what products are selling poorly, what products might we want to try and improve the sales of, what are our business's strengths and weaknesses, are there opportunities for innovation or competitive advantage, how can we improve our decision making? So this is the idea, and I think where we left off last time was I gave you this definition. Business intelligence is about, we have to come up with a strategy. Business is all about developing strategies. And one of the things that we need is a strategy for how we are going to progressively gain intelligence to operate better in the market. And we're going to do that by having processes and technologies that allow us to draw knowledge out of the information we possess. And what I would suggest to you is that almost every company that's been in existence for a while has a huge mountain of data available to it. And in that mountain, I'm a very poor artist, as we will see more and more illustrations of as the semester goes along. In this mountain, as you can see quite clearly from my drawing, there are hidden gold nuggets, okay? And the key is, we need a pickaxe. That's actually a pretty decent looking pickaxe there. We need a pickaxe to be able to go in there and find those nuggets of gold and harvest that information. It's not going to fall into our lap. And if you've ever used a pickaxe like this and tried to find things, you're going to turn over a lot of dirt and plain old rocks before you find something of value. But when you find something of value, in the context we're talking about here, it could really be a significant game changer in your ability to operate your business effectively. And so one of the things that a lot of businesses are focused on right now is they will say, we have this mountain. And we have this database, or really this whole set of databases that have all of this information. And we believe there probably are nuggets of gold in there. How do we get at it? What's the best strategy for us to be able to extract that? Undoubtedly, you have heard about, and we will talk about later this semester, things like big data. Well, what are we talking about when we say big data? We're talking about a really big mountain that we have to go at with our pickaxe and figure out, what is in there that we could learn. So these are things that organizations right now acknowledge that they have this potential value, but how do we get at it? That's the focus of business intelligence. And so the whole idea here is the idea behind business intelligence is taking data that we probably already have, and turning it into usable knowledge. And so I have an example here. We might have a database. And in that database, we obviously have information about all of our products. In this example, product A and product B. And then we have information about all of our customers. So we have information about Customer Smith and Customer Jones and Customer Xavier and all of our customers. We have all of that data in our database. And that's all useful information. But the question is, can we make it even more useful? And so we could take that data and start applying very, very rudimentary analysis to it to turn that into information. And we might be able to build a profile that would tell us Customer Smith buys product A. And what this is sometimes called, as an example, is this is often called market basket analysis. Market basket analysis is really interesting. It's based on the concept of when you go grocery shopping, you fill your basket up with stuff you want to buy and then you buy it. And so a lot of what happens in market basket analysis is we look at things that customers buy in combination and things that customers buy in common with one another, like I just gave as an example from Amazon. It was very interesting to me, having lived in Florida, that Walmart maintains, in addition to all the things that you could expect that Walmart has, Walmart actually has, I forget what term they call it, but like a meteorological department where they pay people to monitor the weather. Now, why would Walmart pay people to monitor the weather? Well, a lot of it is Walmart needs to know when it's going to start getting cold in Tennessee so they know when to bring out the winter clothes and when to get rid of the summer clothes. So they do a lot of modeling of things like temperature and do we really need to stock up on umbrellas because it's going to rain a lot. They do a lot of product adjustment. But beyond that, one article I read said Walmart looks at things like how people behave when a hurricane is headed to their area. Now, it's kind of a joke that people say a lot of times when, hurricane's coming, you go to the grocery store and all the milk and the eggs are gone and all the bread because people panic and they go and buy. The really interesting thing is Walmart discovered two products that proportionally the sales spiked outrageously when a hurricane was headed to an area. Anybody guess what those two products are that spiked just outrageously for Walmart?
Water.
Water would be an obvious one, but it wasn't the one that spiked outrageously. But you are in the right general domain.
Alcohol.
Beer. Apparently, when a hurricane's coming, people go to Walmart and they stock up on water, sure, but they also stock up on beer. The other thing, oddly enough, is Pop-Tarts. Sales of Pop-Tarts spiked significantly when hurricanes are coming. And I guess it's because people figure, I gotta eat, I might not be able to cook anything, Pop-Tarts. And in particular, strawberry Pop-Tarts. So here's the deal. Walmart knows if a hurricane is headed to, a place in Texas, they're going to ship more of those products to those stores in Texas because they know from historical product sales, they can do market basket analysis and they can understand customer behavior. We've used the example here a lot of Amazon, but Walmart can do market basket analysis. How can Walmart do the same kind of analysis as Amazon?
They have online services too.
They do. Walmart has online services, but what about people that shop in the store? Have you noticed how cash registers aren't really cash registers anymore? They're pretty much computers. Well, every time you go to Walmart or Target or any place else and they ring you up, don't think that the only reason why they're recording that information is to give you the total. That information's going into a computer somewhere. And if you have one of those loyalty cards, that gives them the ability to tie that transaction specifically to you and where you live and other facts about you. So companies out there can take the basic data, turn it into information, and potentially gain value from that. We can look at then extending that further, and we can do statistical calculations, and we can say things like product A and B have an 80% sales correlation. 80% of the people that buy product A also buy product B, and or vice versa. So as soon as we see that, we may not understand what the relationship is, but there's a relationship. Another article I read on this subject talks about there being a significant statistical relationship in grocery stores between the sales of diapers and the sales of beer. Okay? Now, there's no direct relationship between those two products, at least I would hope. But there's a statistical relationship that when people go shopping and they purchase diapers, they're very likely to buy beer to go with that. So what we can do is then we can do what we've been talking about here. We can put together a product recommendation system. We can design our stores so that we can influence the way people shop. I don't know if you've noticed this before. This is an area a number of years ago I actually did some research on that was very fascinating. If you walk into a typical grocery store, and this is like the door that you walk in here at the front, what's most likely going to be here at the back? What? Milk, often eggs, and what else is almost always back here? Meat. The meat department is almost always at the back of the store. Now, there are some logistical reasons for that, but one reason is a significant percentage of the people that walk into a store buy this stuff. People go to the store and they get a gallon of milk and they buy some hamburger for a cookout they're having. So, why do we put it at the back of the store? So that when you walk in, you've got to walk all the way past that, and you've got to walk down the aisle of breakfast cereal and have Count Chocula try and tempt you to buy a box of him, okay? For the same reason why by the cash register, they put all those candy bars there, because they want you to grab one, okay? That doesn't happen on accident. And in fact, what researchers do for a lot of store chains is they put, how there are cameras around stores? Sometimes they put cameras around stores for security purposes, but they will also take those same recordings and have researchers draw a diagram of how people navigate through the store, and they'll move stuff in the store. Because there are certain products that they know people are going to go look for, and they'll take them and they'll put them in. Have you ever noticed that it's very rare that if you're buying a lot of stuff at a grocery store, you can't just walk down one aisle and find it? You kind of got to walk all over the store. That's on purpose. They want you to do that because they know you're more likely to grab a bag of Oreos or something else to go with it. So the idea here is we can influence people's behavior if we know how. Now, a good example is I don't drink alcoholic beverages at all. So even if I went to the store and bought diapers, I'm not buying beer. But I do kind of like Oreos, okay? So the more we can learn about a particular customer, the better we can tune our recommendations, the more intelligently we can operate as an organization. So that's what this is about. This is about taking a company that maybe is already operating successfully and figuring out how to move it from being here where it's operating to up here. And adding that little bit extra that maybe our competitors can't do that gives us an advantage. So that's the philosophy behind business intelligence. And so you see this cycle that we use the data, we turn it into information, we use that to gain knowledge, we use that to try and influence customers' decisions, and then we have the ability to look at the success of how that worked out. If Amazon starts making a product recommendation to customers, and they learn, for example, that they recommend a particular product, and 80% of the people they recommend that product to buy it, that'd be an outrageously high number. But let's just say, for example, there's a product that Amazon recommends, and 80% of the people they recommend that to buy it. You know what I'm going to do if I'm Amazon? I'm going to think really seriously about putting that on my homepage so that even more people see it, because it seems like there's something about that product that is really of interest to people. Examples of this. I don't know how many of you ever, I'm going to guess with the demographic of this class, that there probably aren't many of you that are big Oprah Winfrey fans, but you know, maybe I'm wrong about that. She's kind of, you would need to be older, I think, for most of you to be big Oprah fans. But Oprah has a book club. When Oprah recommends a book in her book club, it's like everybody on the planet wants to go out and buy that book. Well, if you're Amazon, and it's not like Oprah calls you in advance and says, hey, this is going to be my book recommendation today. But if you can see that all of a sudden, in the last half hour, some book, you just sold 500 copies of that, something's going on. You know, something's happening with that book. We need to promote it more. We need to get that out in front of people because maybe something's happening in current events or it was mentioned on a TV show. If we have the ability to recognize those things when they're happening, we can capitalize on that. So how has this evolved over time? There are different stages in the evolution of business intelligence because we can't jump to, as an organization, these really, really advanced skills. So what we have been doing so far in our data analysis that you have done in this class is trying to understand what happened. How much of this product did we sell last quarter? How much did we sell in the north versus the south? Those are very, very valuable questions, and organizations can employ reporting tools to analyze data to help them understand what happened. And really, the primary way we can get at this information is just using a traditional database with some standard queries. You know, select information about this product and it being sold in this area, and we can pull back that information and model it. Well, the next level is why did it happen? And you can imagine that that is significantly more challenging to answer that question. You know, we might know, okay, we sold more strawberry muesli in the South, or we're not selling muesli yet, we sold more yogurt in the South. why? And so in order to answer that question, we might have to do some development of theories, and we might have to test some information. We might have to pull information in from outside sources. You know, we might say, why did we sell so much ice cream in the South? And we might need to look at weather information, and we might discover that it was unseasonably hot in the South, and so people bought ice cream at a higher rate than normal. But trying to answer why something happened, much more challenging, and we have to develop more ad hoc queries or come up with questions to ask that are not routine predefined ones. We have to get a little bit more creative in how we examine the data. So once we understand what happened and why it happened, then we can turn our attention to what will happen in the future. So now we're moving into the domain of predictive analytics. And obviously you can see the real value here. You know, what happened just gives me the ability to say, oh, I screwed up. But what will happen in the future gives me the ability to take advantage of an opportunity that I might otherwise miss. I think it's Yogi Berra, the famous baseball player who made the statement, predictions are really hard, especially about the future. And that's really true. I mean, it's one thing to understand what happened yesterday. It's a whole different thing to predict what's likely to happen next week or next month or next year. Well, a lot of organizations right now are really, they have a handle on stage one for sure. They probably have a fair amount of skill in stage two, but most people that work with analytics will tell you never really totally know why, because people are really, really complicated. What will happen is a domain that a lot of companies are focusing on, but then notice stage four, subtly different question, what is happening? So what's the focus here?
Correct.
What's happening right this second? I mean, this is about what happened in the past. This is about what's happening in the future. But operationalizing, this is the idea of what's going on right now. This is back to my example of, in the last 5 minutes, some obscure book that we only sold 5 copies of in the last 6 months, we've sold 500 of them in the last 30 minutes. Well, if I see that happening in real time, maybe I can take advantage of this. There's a whole lot of companies out there that their entire product line is based on them being able to understand the context of something. There's one organization I'm familiar with that employs significant business intelligence and data analytics in the context of video gaming to sell people things in the context of a video game. You know, you're playing a video game and your whatever is about to lose its energy and die, and for 10 cents they'll sell you a shield and they get you to make that purchase. Well, everything in that company's business model is about understanding what that character is doing in the context of that game right that second, so that they can make you an offer in the middle of that particular, you're fighting with the dragon that might tempt you to buy. If we can understand what is happening in the moment, that's a much higher level of understanding. And in order to do this, now, instead of us thinking in terms of taking our pickaxe to the mountain, now we have to reorient things so that instead of it being a mountain, it's kind of an ongoing stream of information that's flowing at me, and I'm looking at it in real time. That's one of the huge challenges with a lot of what happens in big data, with data stream analysis, to try and understand what's happening in real time. Well, stage 5 is one that a lot of companies really never get to, which is, we're not content to just say what will happen. We want to be able to control what will happen in the future. We want to be able to influence what people will do based on the information we give them, how we behave as an organization. So this journey is one that a lot of companies are on right now. Very, very few of them would put themselves at the far right of this diagram, because so much of this field is still evolving as new software, new tools, new techniques are actually created. Questions or comments or observations about this?
Another, besides recommendation is ratings.
Absolutely. You know, if we think about Amazon, you know, if you think about all the different, Amazon is such a great example because they do so many things so well. And part of that is because they have good management, part of it's because they've been around a long time, part of it's because they have a lot of resources to throw at things. But Amazon not only knows what you bought, which is a pretty interesting fact, but they know whether you're happy with what you bought because you rated it. You know, you might have bought a toaster, and so they know you bought it, but then you came back 3 weeks later and rated it 1 star. So they know, okay, he bought this, but it turns out he didn't like it. That's a very much more powerful statement of fact than just knowing that you bought it. So think about all the different things that Amazon has engineered in their systems to know about you. They know what products you look at. They know what products you put in your cart. They know what products you buy. They potentially know whether you like or don't like the products. They know what products you've returned. They know what things you've bought over and over again as time goes by. And then they know all kinds of other things like when you buy clothes, what size clothes do you buy? What color? What styles? When you buy books, what genres? What authors? If you think about all the interesting questions that they can ask and answer from the data that they have engineered in their systems, it really, that would be a pretty interesting data set to be able to look at. An example of this from another organization that you're probably familiar with, Netflix. Netflix does a whole lot of this. Netflix has a recommendation system where they look at what you have watched and they recommend other things that you're going to be interested in. Netflix has a similar business intelligence mindset where they really want to understand what customers are interested in. And with Netflix, they go out and contract with movie studios and TV production facilities to buy certain products that they can then distribute to you. Well, how do they know what to buy and what not to buy? They know based on the history of what people have watched. They know that if really a lot of people watched several Harry Potter movies, that when the next Harry Potter movie comes out, they really need to get that because that's something customers are going to be interested in. So there's all kinds of different ways that business intelligence, what's that?
Yeah, Netflix, I remember a few years ago had, does anybody remember Max? It's
Yeah,
like
I
the
do.
Netflix assistant, and tried to, you just click Max and he automatically throws out like 5 movies or shows for you to watch. But I think people are too unpredictable when it comes to what mood they're in or what they want to watch at any given time. But they still do have, what they're doing now is.
I don't know that they've done this recently, but I can remember a couple of years ago, Netflix actually had a contest aimed at university students and researchers where they released a database, anonymized, of what movies and things people watched, and they wanted people to come up with predictive algorithms, and then they said that what they would do is they would test those predictive algorithms on their site, and whoever came up with the best algorithm, they would actually win a prize and they gave them money for it. So Netflix acknowledges they do an awful lot of experimenting. They're trying out different things to try and progressively get better over time. So that's interesting. I don't remember that particular one, but it's a great example of this. Anybody think of any other examples that might be different? Or yes, sir.
I have more question.
Okay.
So considering how involving and how experimental this is, would it be advisable for an organization to contract out its analytics, its modeling, because it's not really something that the third party is not involved in your business, and most of the questions you have to ask are ad hoc. They're not things that are preset. So most times for organizations who do not have the expertise to do this, is it advisable for them to contract out?
You absolutely can contract out to, a lot of times it's called market research companies or other similar organizations where you can give them your data set and they will analyze it. I would suggest that most organizations of size are going to want to develop that competency in-house, because there is a risk if I turn my data over to a third party. Not only am I learning from it, but they might be learning from it too, and so some of my secrets might slip out. But absolutely, there are companies out there that you can pass your data off to, and they will analyze it for you. And so for a smaller organization, that might be something that you would want to consider. That's a very good question. There's another question with this that I'll go ahead and introduce here, and we will probably talk about this in more detail a little bit later. Does it make any of you uncomfortable when I say Amazon knows everything you've ever looked at and everything you've bought, and they could produce a list? I mean, maybe some of you are saying, I don't care. And I'm not suggesting any of you are looking at anything inappropriate or anything like that, but does it not make you a little bit uncomfortable that like some corporation that, you know, is like, you don't know anybody there and they're just kind of this faceless organization and they have all of this information about you? That is largely the world in which we face. And actually what happens now is, what really gets interesting is, the reason why Kroger wants you to buy a loyalty card is because you mentioned about sending data out. But what actually happens now is, a lot of times companies will kind of forge alliances together, and Kroger will build a database about all the groceries you buy, and Amazon builds a database about all the other stuff you buy, and maybe Target builds a database about all the stuff you buy from them. And there are companies out there that will bring all of this data together, and they can build a psychological profile of you based on what you buy. You know, here's somebody who buys a lot of Pop-Tarts and gunpowder. You know, I mean, what does that tell us about them? And so, yeah, there are market research companies out there that gather and pull all of that information. And I think at some level, most people would say, there's a point at which you get a little bit uncomfortable about that. That's the issue of privacy that comes to the forefront here. I have a colleague who will remain nameless that whenever he gets like one of the loyalty cards, he gets it in someone else's name, and he uses their name and their address. So he has all these loyalty cards that have somebody else's name so that they can't keep track of him. Okay, you're really not supposed to do that, but
I have a question.
yeah.
Do you know how LinkedIn gives you jobs recommendation? Would this be in the same category?
Same idea. Absolutely the same idea. They're looking at, in this case, as opposed to things like products that you buy together, they're looking at contacts you have in common, and things like when you actually click to read more about like an article that someone has posted, you know, what's that about? And sometimes, if you've noticed, they'll bring in information from other sources. Like now, LinkedIn is owned and operated by Microsoft. So it's not unusual when I'm browsing on LinkedIn to see advertisements for things that I have looked at through other companies on the Microsoft network. So it's all about bringing together this information based on what they believe they understand about who the person is that's sitting in front of the computer and what they're interested in, what they're doing. A lot of websites, it's about getting you to buy stuff. Clearly Amazon is that way. There are a lot of other websites that it's all about what's called stickiness, where stickiness is the idea of just getting you to stay on the website longer. Because the more they can get you to stay on the website, the more they can advertise to you, and that's how they make money, is advertising. LinkedIn would fall into that pattern. Portal sites like Yahoo, they have all those news articles and all those other things, and the idea is they want to get you to go there and they want to get you to stay on the site for a long time so that they can make a lot of money advertising to you. All of this the better we can craft our content, the more sticky our site's going to be, and that's going to be influenced by what we know about our customers. Yes, sir.
Back to the companies sharing data. Is there not a legal implication to that? Because we do sign this I wouldn't share data with any other person agreement most times. So don't we as consumers have a stand legally to say, why would you take my data out of your base to another?
Most of the time, and what you're talking about is privacy policies, and we'll, since we're on this topic, which I think is very relevant, let's look at this for a second. If we go to Amazon, well, you see my homepage here is Yahoo, but let's go to Amazon, Amazon. There's Amazon.com, and usually at the bottom of the page, in like the tiniest type they can put it there, we're going to see a link to their privacy policy. So let's see how long it takes us to find their privacy policy. Here it is, right down here, privacy notice. Now, this is not like a sentence. This is like a very, very long document written that's going to involve a lot of legal terms. And look at this. What information about customers does Amazon.com gather? Information you give us. We receive and store any information you enter on our website. Look at that. Anything you've ever searched for, they've stored that. You can choose not to provide certain information, but then you might not be able to take advantage of many of our features. That's a nice way of saying we don't have to sell to you. We use the information that you provide for such purposes as responding to your requests, customizing future shopping for you, improving our store. So what we've been talking about here. But look at this. Automatic information. We receive and store certain kinds of information. Look at this. Mobile. When you download or use apps created by Amazon, we may receive information about your location. We haven't even thought about or talked about that. We can see that people are visiting our Amazon.com mobile site from the beach, and we can recommend towels and sunscreen and other things of that sort. Email. Anytime you've sent them email, they have recorded that as a part of your profile. And then here's what you're talking about here, information from other sources. I love the way they say we might, which is another way of saying we will. We might receive information about you from other sources and add it to our account information. So basically, whether you realize it or not, Amazon is telling you we're doing all of this stuff.
Would it
And
be like payment? They're using your information as payment for the service they're offering, so they have no conscience about the fact that they're just selling your information.
well, and you say that they have no conscience about it. A lot of people, they have thoughtfully analyzed this, and they have said, kind of like what we saw a few moments ago, most of you guys don't seem to care. So if you don't care, why should they care?
That's not true.
I mean, it sounds like you disagree, but most of your classmates don't seem like they really care.
They have a particular service that you might have to use, and because you have to use it, they're just going to take your information and do what they want with it. And then if you don't use your service, then you're just kind of out of luck.
Exactly. I mean, that's your choice, isn't it? Your choice is either you buy from Amazon and you get all their great deals and all their convenience, but you give up all this information.
But it's anywhere now.
And if you don't want to give up this information, you just can't shop at Amazon. And if you're going to say, well, okay, I won't shop at Amazon, I'll go to Walmart. Have you noticed next time you go to Walmart,
It's anywhere.
when you go to Walmart, next time you walk into the store, notice that right by the front door, there's a notice there that says, we can record everything that you do in our store. So not only does Walmart hypothetically, or they definitely keep your transaction information from the cash register, but like we were talking about before, they may be videotaping you walking around in their store and using that information. That's kind of the world in which we live today. Now, what's interesting is how did we get there? Partly we got there because we have technology now that lets us do this. But the other reason why we're there is because we have the technology, but also it's obvious to everyone that there's value here. You know, if there was no value in this, companies wouldn't do it. But the fact that all of these companies are doing this and investing these resources in it points to the fact that obviously there's real value for them in learning how to operate their company effectively.
Is Microsoft owning LinkedIn have anything to do with the reason there's more .NET jobs posted on there than Java?
Well, you know, I can't give you an answer to that question, but you know, there's that old adage about, you know, the golden rule is he who has the gold makes the rules.
Yeah.
I mean, if you own LinkedIn, you get to control what gets put where. If you own Yahoo, you get to decide. If you own Amazon, you get to decide. So, you know, I can't answer that question. It's not like Microsoft's going to ever come out and say, hey, we're manipulating you.
So,
But they are. Yes, ma'am.
So I guess just even just regarding these companies, but and my memory's a little hazy, but I think maybe a couple months ago, didn't Congress pass to let like internet providers sell your browsing history? I mean that's even if you use the internet itself, like
did they pass? I think it was an executive order. I was in.
I think it
Trump signed an executive order. It didn't pass.
I don't know what the ultimate status of, but I know that was something that was being discussed. And you're right, it was about the idea that not only could, in this case, Amazon collect data, but if you use a charter for your internet service provider, they could collect that. Now, let me preface what I'm saying with the university does not do this. But think about it. The university, anytime you log on to Wi-Fi, you have to authenticate with your username and password, right? So if the university were so inclined, they could keep a database of every website you've been to and every product you've looked at on Amazon and every product you've looked at on every other store and every YouTube video you've watched and everything else. Now, let me reiterate, the university does not do that. But when you go to Panera Bread and you use their Wi-Fi, they will tell you that they monitor what you do on their Wi-Fi. So that's the world, once again, that we live in. Yes, sir.
One of the reasons I brought that up was a couple of months ago there was this hit between Apple and Apple and the feds that they wanted to get into somebody's phone and they wanted to know what's in it and Apple would not release it. So Apple made this whole big deal about we protect our customer data, we don't release it. But going back to what you say, they do release it, but for their own interest. If they want to get something from the party, but when it comes to what would be detrimental socially, they will pretend like they don't really release it.
I think your point is a very apt one, you know. I will say, in regards to Apple, Apple is actually one of the best organization in terms of protecting certain elements of customer information. Like every iPhone and similar device that Apple makes has a part of the device that they call the secure enclave. And there's certain things stored in the secure enclave. In the example of an iPhone, one of the things that is stored there is your fingerprint. The data that is in the secure enclave is secure from any other entity. Apple does not have a record of your fingerprint. They will tell the U.S. government, we cannot give you that information because the way they store it so that they can match your thumbprint, but they can't print out your thumbprint for another party. So Apple is widely regarded as being one of the good guy companies that does make an effort to protect customers, but that's in things like what we just talked about and not what happens when you visit apple.com, because they're going to keep track of your stuff. And you're absolutely right. The companies that scream about, we don't want to give this data to the government, they're not shy about using it for their own purposes.
But then again, it doesn't make them, how do I say it now? They pretend that, like WhatsApp did this thing one time where they encrypt your data from beginning to the end, right? But that does not mean that they still don't have access to the data. They can still do what they want to do with it. But they just pretend in front of everybody for the show of saying that thing. But the bad thing is, even governments that would have helped to enforce these laws, they want your data also. So they cannot say, okay, companies need to enforce your data. So they're trying to look for ways to open up the whole thing. So where do we stand? Where is there going to be
I think-
any form of law against this somewhere?
I think one of the biggest issues, the three biggest issues are safety, security, and control. Being that with the way data is flying around, how safe will it be? How secure will it be? Then how much control does this data have over the user? Being that if Amazon knows my shopping pattern, Kroger knows my shopping pattern, will my bank be able to get those data from them, or the credit company be able to get those data to check my credit spending? They could make me poorer, or they could make me richer.
Absolutely.
To me, those are like the big issues that come with all this.
And excellent point. Everybody's making just really excellent points. I think the one thing I would say is you have to assume anymore that your data is being collected and it is being used unless you're told explicitly that it's not. And even then, I'd be suspicious as to whether or not you're being lied to about that. I mean, that's just kind of the reality that we face today.
So, does Amazon state that they give their data to third parties? I think they just use it
Let's look.
for in-house.
Resources, we might receive information about you.
Yeah, here's we might receive.
Send it out.
Yeah, let's look. That's usually addressed here. Here, does Amazon? Here's
Giving their data out.
here it is right here. Does Amazon share the information it receives? What about affiliated businesses we do not control? So this would be like Microsoft.
I think look at the first statement when I said that.
Oh,
We
it,
are not in business of selling it to others. Selling, not sharing.
Like Google.
but
I mean, this could
But-
have been yes or no answer. I mean, no.
a public relations person wrote that sentence. Okay, you know, they can say, "Oh, we're not in the business of selling your data," but if they
Not
do,
share.
you know.
Might not sell, but might share.
Yeah, exactly. So look at this. We work closely with affiliated businesses. You can tell when a third party's involved. We employ other companies to perform services. I'm just looking. I mean, we'd have to read this whole thing. So they tell you the situations in which they release your information. They also tell you how secure it is and what about advertising and do you have the information, you know, can you find out what they know about you? What choices do I have? You know, there are tools that Amazon makes in keeping with what we said. Amazon's been around for a long time. They tend to reflect best practices in the industry. So they tell customers this stuff. Now, how many of you have ever looked at this page before we looked at it now? And think about it, you're all really savvy computer people. You know, you're in a graduate computer program. You know more about computers than the typical person. What's the chance that, you know, your grandma or grandpa has visited and looked at this? You know, that most people, you know, they don't think about it, and even if they do think about it, they don't take the time to investigate it. So
Why don't they make this page just like 10 sentences and we can read and understand? It's too bulky.
Legal loophole.
I can tell you this never caught on.
Make this one just one page.
There was an effort many years ago to create in web browsers where you could go to your web browser and you could tell it how you wanted your information shared. And you could say it's okay if they get this, it's not okay when they get this. And you would visit a website and the website would have to have answers to certain questions set up in their profile. And your web browser would read that profile and compare it to your preferences, and it would like put a light up in the corner to let you know that this site uses your data in a way that you might not prefer. And that was this big old thing that a lot of companies were talking about, and but the bottom line was the companies that had the money realized it wasn't in their interest to do that, so that all just went away. So I'm not suggesting like it's a giant conspiracy, but I am telling you that the people that all have the money and the resources, they want your information. So they're not going to go out of their way to create a framework to stop you from getting it. And by the way, most websites will tell you somewhere that if you don't like this, you have a remedy, which is don't shop with us. And some organizations in the past, I forget who it was, there was one organization in the past that got sued. And they told their customers that if you send us a letter in the mail, we will delete all the information we have about you, but you should be aware we will never do business with you ever again. I don't know how many customers took them up on that, because the fact is, as much as this might annoy me about Amazon, I like buying stuff on Amazon, so I put up with it. You know, and that's like a few months ago when Amazon got all this PR flack because they weren't paying their workers enough and they were working them too hard and in hard working conditions. And most American citizens, they were like, oh, that's too sad, but I really like Amazon, so oh well. You know what I mean? That's the reality in which businesses operate. So, I mean, this is not off topic for our discussion. It's actually quite on topic. This is where companies are these days. And it's not just Amazon, it's not just web-based companies. ETSU, they're not recording your web information or other things like that, but ETSU and other universities look at things like what courses students take and what times of the day do they take courses. And they try and use that to orient the things that happen in the university to make it more student-friendly, under the perception that if they make it more student-friendly, they're going to get more students, which is good for the university. So all of those are outgrowths of business intelligence. But this is very much a two-edged sword. The value here is I know about my customers. From the customer's perspective, I get value from the company knowing about me, but I also have given up a little bit of myself. You know, I'm not as mysterious as I once was. Maybe you don't care about being mysterious or not, but some people really like to, they like to be an enigma. They don't like people to understand them. Well, if you're that kind of person, this is not what, this would drive you crazy because you are no longer mysterious. Well, the next thing we are going to talk about here is related to data warehousing. And I guess let's talk about this for a second because it does tie into a lot of the things we have been talking about. If a company would have just one computer system with one database that had everything in it, then obviously we could work with that information fairly easily. The reality is most companies don't have that as the situation in their organization. They have a lot of different systems that do different things in the organization. So what many organizations will do is they will create something called a data warehouse. And they will use that as the infrastructure to drive their business intelligence efforts. And so what a data warehouse is this idea, and I love this diagram here, which I'm assuming is just something fake as a picture that somebody created because they seem to have gone out of their way to put as many arrows as they could there. And this looks like a monkey skeleton here or something. I don't know what's going on there. But we have all of these different systems that have potentially all of this information about our company and our customers, and it's scattered across all of these different environments. And what a data warehouse does is we go in and we pull this information out and we put it in one place. And then we can use that repository, that data warehouse, for our data modeling, our analysis, and so on. So what actually happens here, and let me make sure I don't have this on another slide. I don't, is we go through a process some of you might be very familiar with called the ETL process, where ETL stands for extract, transform, and load. And so what we do is maybe each one of these rectangles here represents a different database. So we go into these different databases and we extract information, and then we use, this is a software product now that's going to use logic to connect things together. It's going to build the relationship between what's in database system A and what's in database system C. And it's going to impose a schema upon that So it's going to transform the data, which means throwing some data out that we don't care about. It might mean doing some data conversion, but it's ultimately going to create a schema and then load that data into the data warehouse. And then we do our analytics against this data warehouse. Now, I already hinted at this. There is a more contemporary cutting-edge technique than this that we will talk about a little bit later that eliminates the need for a data warehouse. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say that if you visited all 100 of the Fortune 100 companies in this country, every one of them would have a data warehouse. Probably 500 out of the 500 in the Fortune 500 would have a data warehouse, because it's still a very, very common thing for organizations to create. Oftentimes what an organization will do is we have people that are non-technical that have access to the data warehouse. So for example, a marketing manager might be able to go into the data warehouse, and he or she has been trained to do pivot tables in Excel. That's the extent of their ability, but they're pretty good with pivot tables, and they can connect that up to the data warehouse, okay? So we were talking about the concept of a data warehouse, okay? And you will experience work with a data warehouse in some of our lab activities before the semester's over. So if we talk about this data warehouse, what are some of the characteristics of a data warehouse? Let me start off by giving you a definition from Bill Inman, who has written a lot about data warehouse design. And you can see this is not at all a new definition, but it's a well-accepted one. A data warehouse is a subject-oriented, integrated, time-variant, and non-volatile collection of data in order to support management decisions. So there's a lot in that definition right there. And by the way, if I were to ask you on a midterm exam, what's a data warehouse and how is it useful to an organization, I would not expect you to put, quote, a data warehouse is a subject-oriented integrated. You don't need to memorize that. But you should be able to give me a good answer to that question. And if my question said, what is a data warehouse and what are some of the important characteristics, I'd want you to be able to describe them. Now, almost never will I give you 4 things like I'm about to, and then on the exam say list and define all 4. I'll ask you to discuss a couple of them. This isn't about memorization. It's about understanding the concepts and, more importantly, being able to apply them. So when we say a data warehouse is subject-oriented, what does that mean? Well, that means that we design a data warehouse so that people that might not be computer experts can use it, which means that as we think about how the data is organized, we try to think about it not only from a computing perspective, but based on how our users that are going to consume the data think about this as well. So, for example, maybe in our organization we sell clothing, okay? And there are many technical characteristics by which we classify clothing, including things like the fabric that it's made of, the manufacturing process, and so on. But on a more simplistic level, somebody might want to look at all of the shirts versus all of the pants, and all the blouses versus all of the scarves. And so we think about, okay, this data that we have, how are people going to interact with it? What are the questions that they are going to be asking? And how can we make this very, very user-friendly for them? And so we organize it in a way that should be very, very easy to be understood by the people that are going to be using this. We want it to be integrated, which means that we only want to bring in and present data that's accurate, data that's correct, data that's consistent. And Ideally, we want to bring in the best data we can get our hands on, which means maybe internal and external sources. For example, to reference something I mentioned earlier in our time together today, if I'm Walmart, I might want to store on a daily basis our sales of all of our clothing products. But it might also make sense for me to store on a daily basis information about the weather. Now, Walmart does not control the weather, but if I can do a query, if I can look at data and look at temperature trends versus clothing sales trends, that might really help me understand exactly why we are seeing the sales patterns that we're seeing. Understanding, of course, that the weather is not uniform all across the globe. The weather in South Florida is very different than the weather in Oregon. So I might, in my data warehouse, either store myself or connect to an external source that can give me historical weather information for my different store locations. I might, if I'm Walmart, put a very simple weather center in every one of my stores that every day collects information about temperature and rainfall and things like that, and throw that into a database so that I have that information about not even just like what the weather was like in Johnson City, but what the weather was like at a particular store in Johnson City. So I have to think about all the different data sources that I would want to pull in that might have utility. A key element in a data warehouse is being able to, if you will, seek through time and see what happens over time. So I might want to say, how many units of something did I sell last year? I might want to say, how much did I sell every month last year? I might want to say, how many units did I sell exactly a year ago? But the key is I would want to have the ability to connect my data with some kind of time reference so that I could, if you will, almost play back through time and see everything happens. See how everything happened as time went by for the sake of doing time-oriented modeling or just to understand the data from a time dimension. And then non-volatile means that we pull this data into a data warehouse and make it available to people, typically in a read-only fashion. I want the marketing manager to be able to go in and run his or her analysis, but I don't want him changing the data. So if you think about this from a database perspective, this is going to be a database where we do a lot of selects and joins, but no updates and no inserts and no deletes. This is a read-only database because I don't want the marketing manager going in and saying, I don't need this data, I can delete it, and the plant manager really needed that data. So the idea is we capture this data warehouse and we make it available, and it's persistent for as long as we do this. Now, what's interesting about this is how companies have managed this over time has changed significantly. I talked about the ETL process. It used to be that organizations would typically rebuild a data warehouse very, very sporadically. You might create a data warehouse for your organization once a quarter. So basically every 3 months you're going to build a new data warehouse. As technology has improved and as computational speed and power has improved, companies have gone to creating these on a much more regular basis. Because the problem with creating a data warehouse only once a quarter is by the time you start using the data, it's out of date. And it could be data from several months ago, and that's of no utility. So over time, companies move from doing it once a month to once a week to now it's not unusual in a lot of organizations for their data warehouse to be built every night. And so you're looking at data from the previous day. But if you think about that in terms of what we were talking about a few moments ago here, could I ever do what is happening now, real-time analysis out of a data warehouse? No, because I don't have what's happening now. Best case scenario, I have what happened yesterday and the day before that. So that's the challenge we have with a data warehouse. It is very, very good for some types of analysis, but clearly it's not going to give me the full power that I would seek here. Now, let's talk about database technical issues for just a moment. A data warehouse is an example of what is called an OLAP database, where OLAP stands for Online Analytic Processing. Online in this context doesn't mean like on the internet. It means like happening in real time as opposed to batch. That is distinct from an OLTP focused database, which stands for Online Transaction Processing. An ERP system is most typically would be considered an OLTP system. If you were writing a database and configuring a database to attach to a cash register, that would clearly be an example of an OLTP database, a database that Amazon would run to gather transaction information as customers made purchase. That would be an OLTP system. If you look at it, an OLTP database is optimized to get data into the system. An OLTP system almost functions like a huge vacuum cleaner. It's all about capturing transaction information. I can't have any data fly by uncaptured. If you placed an order with Amazon and never got it and you called them up and they said, oh, our database just didn't capture that particular transaction, you wouldn't be real happy. You expect Amazon to capture and process every transaction. That's the goal of an OLTP system. It's for management and daily business. You don't really have a lot of data in an individual transaction. You know, an individual customer purchase might add one record to a database with the items that the customer purchased and certain technical information, but it's not like it's going to be putting a huge amount of data into the system. The key is it's going to be processing a lot of small bundles of data. And as we were just talking about, this is business critical. That is very different from an OLAP system. I met a few database administrators. I guess this is about a year and a half ago. And we were sitting around talking, and in its particular organization, which was very large, one of them was essentially the head database person over their OLTP systems, and the other one was in charge of their OLAP systems. And it was very interesting to get a feel for their philosophies and how they were different. And the OLAP guy said, you know, if our database ever goes down, you know, it might be an hour before anybody calls me. And when they call me, usually I say, okay, we'll get on that, and you know, we'll try and have it fixed by the end of the day or tomorrow. And for the most part, people are okay with it. The OLTP guy, if his system ever goes down, he's going to probably get called like a minute after that, because as soon as that system goes down, now you can't do business anymore. You can't process transactions. Everything stops until it can be fixed. So there's a real difference here in an OLTP system, which has to capture everything, and it's very business critical, whereas an OLAP system, this is what we use for our data warehouse. And the data warehouse here, it's very optimized not on taking data in, but on getting data out. We even observed a few moments ago that it tends to be read-only. It's not taking data in at all anymore, but it's optimized around giving data out. And the whole focus here is not on these daily small transactions, but on decision-making and making available large data sets. So the idea would be, I might want to say, show me all of the information about all of our sales of sweaters for the last 6 years. Well, that's going to be a huge amount of data that it's going to send to me. But the data that it's going to send is going to be much more summarized. It's not going to give me the name of everyone that we sold the sweater to, but it will give me key metrics about our sales of that particular product. This clearly, because this system is just used for analytics purposes, it tends to be less critical, we talked about the fact that the data is not updated in real time, it's just updated on a regular interval, and everything in the database, the key element that we tend to focus on is time. What happened during particular time intervals, what was going on at a particular point in time, and so our database structure tends to be reflective of that. So what you see in the ETL process, and I'm going to skip over one slide for the sake of time, what you see is here are a bunch of OLTP systems. We have an ERP system, we have a CRM system, we have other systems perhaps from SAP, we have other systems from other companies. And what we do in the ETL process is we gather up that data, we extract it, we transform it, and then we load it into a business warehouse. Now, I think I used the term before, data warehouse. You'll sometimes see the term business warehouse alternately used to describe it. Same concept, where this is going to be an OLAP system. And then we run our analytics against the OLAP system. We do not run analytics against these guys over here because, like we talked about before, we may be asking some very, very sophisticated queries, and executing those queries might slow the performance of those systems. And those systems, they're focused on being vacuum cleaners. They're about getting the data in, not spitting the data out. So if you ask it to give you back data, that could hurt its overall performance. So this is a very, very common business intelligence structure that we see in most contemporary organizations that are doing business intelligence work. Well, we are about out of time. Any questions or comments about this before we wrap up today?
So HANA would be the OLAP.
HANA is both in one at the same time, which is what makes it the next generation of this, which, yes, we will talk about HANA, because HANA makes this less necessary, if unnecessary at all. Yes, sir.
Okay, so because I have a little bit of experience with this, when you say HANA is both, it's hard for me to comprehend, because I tried looking that up and I've not been able to come to the point where I say where it's both. But before that, I wanted to ask, there's a time you said that for real-time analytics, you can skip the data warehouse directly and analyze directly. Were you thinking about a particular tool? Was it HANA you're thinking about also? Okay.
And when I say it's both, what I mean is, I say, and it's a very, I'm at a high level of concept, but fundamentally we said an OLTP system is really optimized around getting data in. We said an OLAP system is optimized around getting data out. HANA is equally good at both, and it can get data in as good as the best OLTP systems, and it can push data out as good as the best OLAP systems.
Can you choose HANA as any of them, or it can run both workload at the same time?
Both at the same
Okay,
time.
At the same time.
You could, if you wanted to, just use it for OLTP. You could just use it for OLAP, but if you're going to make the investment, it's kind of like going out and buying a hot rod and never driving it above 15 miles an hour. If you're going to buy a high-performance car, you want to drive it fast. If you're going to buy HANA, you probably are going to want to do both OLTP and OLAP with it. Otherwise, you wouldn't have spent the money on HANA. But we'll come back and talk about HANA and how it relates to this.